Hey, Wool Gang, and welcome back. We are finally going to be doing our Mitten Knit Along. I'm so excited to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful creatures of my world, this is going to be the last knitting series that I do on Coffee with Kerri-Lynn. I am very excited to tell all of you that we have a second YouTube channel, and I will put that in the description box below. And after this Mitten Knit Along is done on Coffee with Kerri-Lynn, we will be moving all of the fiber art content onto Chestnut Woolen Mill. So we hope that you follow us over there as well. So today we're going to start, and this is a very basic pattern. And how I usually do my knit alongs is I go through the pattern with you. Now, I learned how to knit and crochet and do all kinds of fiber arts through my grandmother, my mom, my aunts, my cousins. In the afternoon, everybody would gather around in a circle, sort of like a crafting circle, if you will, and they would tote their craft project out and have some iced coffee in the summertime, and they'd sit in the yard up at camp, and everybody would have their project, and they'd do all their little gossiping and look at everybody else's really handy work. And if you wanted to participate, you had to learn a craft. Now, sometimes learning a craft or a new hobby is very daunting. And how my family did it was you ask them, I want to learn how to knit a mitten. And my grandmother or my mom, my aunts, my cousins, they'd rummage all through their craft supplies, and everybody would come up with the correct size needles, and somebody would come up with the right amount of yarn. And then you'd sit in the craft circle, and they would tell you the amount of stitches to cast on. Then they would tell you the pattern that you were going to be doing. Then they would tell you how many inches of that pattern that you need to do. And that's kind of how I do all of my tutorials, all of my knit alongs, all of my one-on-one teachings in the Fiber Podcast Studio. That being said, I know that sometimes that can confuse a lot of people, so I am going to write the basic pattern that we're going to use today to complete this segment of the knit along. I'm going to write that in the description box below. You can screenshot it and you can work on it at your leisure. Now we're doing a basic ladies mitten. It's a medium size, about the size of my hand. You are going to have to know how to knit and how to purl to complete this mitten. We're not doing a knitting tutorial. I'm not doing a purl tutorial. You just need to already know the basic stitches of knitting. So that would be your knit stitch and your purl stitch. You are going to need 223 yards of a medium worsted weight yarn. I'm using Patterns Classic Wool. And these skeins happen to have 194 yards, so I'm going to be using 2 skeins. You can use whatever yarn you would like to use. You can use acrylic yarn, you can use wool, whatever you have on hand, as long as you have 223 yards of it, you're going to be able to complete this knit along. You are going to need double point needles. Don't be intimidated. I know a lot of people do not know how to knit on double point needles. It's really not as hard as you think, and this is great practice for using double point needles. You're going to need a size 5 and a size 6. You will notice that I'm using vintage needles. I get 97% of my tools that I use in the Fiber Podcast Studio. 97% of the decor that we have in the Fiber Podcast Studio comes from either the thrift store, it comes from yard sales, auctions, Facebook Marketplace, and our local thrift store had these particular double points for 50 cents a piece. So it was a steal. You don't have to spend a lot of money to try a hobby. You can get your tools secondhand, and that is perfectly fine, especially if you're not sure if you're going to stick with the hobby. And lastly, you don't need this. This is an optional portion. For $1.25, they had the noodle bowl sets at our Dollar Tree, so I picked up 2 noodle bowl sets because I'm going to use this as a yarn bowl. Once again, you don't have to have a ton of money to start a craft or a hobby. The spoon is going to be absolutely useless for the knitting, but it will be good to put your sugar in your coffee or your tea. The knitting, the chopsticks can double as knitting needles if you're in a pinch. And now we've got the bowl. And all I'm going to do is take my ball of yarn, set it in the bowl, and thread it through the hole. And now I've got a knitting bowl like everybody else. All the professionals have the knitting bowl, and I do too, and mine comes from the Dollar Tree. I didn't spend a lot of money to prepare for this particular knit along. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to cast on 42 stitches onto my double point needles. You can use any stretchy cast on that you like. I'm going to start with my slip knot and my working yarn. This is the first stitch, and we're going to cast on 42 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're at 20. We're at 30. The thing with yarn bowls, when you first start with your ball, they can be a little daunting. So you got to kind of pull your thread. 35. 42. Now I'm going to take a count, because it's always good to take a count to make sure you've got everything there. 2, 6, 8. 42. So we've got our 42 stitches. Now we're going to divide these evenly over 3 needles. So it's going to be 14 stitches per needle. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Some of you might have noticed there was a slide jump in the video. We had some fur babies that had to go out, so I had to pause the video and continue. It happens. We live on a working homestead. This is my second needle. have 14 stitches on the second needle, and that should leave us with 14 stitches on the third needle. 14, yes. I think this is the hardest part of working with double pointed needles because you can't twist the stitches and you can't twist the needles. So if you're working with double points and you're making socks and you're making mittens, this is going to be absolutely the most difficult part of the entire project. And that is being very careful not to twist your stitches, not to twist the yarn, and not to twist the needles. Now I'm just going to turn. I have my 42 stitches distributed over 3 needles. That's 14 stitches per needle. And now I am going to join. And I join it with a little knot. Some people knit join. I happen to do it the lazy way. Now, right about now is a good time to grab a different color piece of yarn because you're going to want to mark the last needle. A lot of people mark between the second to the last and the very last stitch, because if you put your marker on the very end of your last needle, it tends to fly off. So I'm just going to reach behind me and see what we have for yarn in the yarn container. What do we got? We have all kinds of yarn everywhere. But of course, when you need it, you know how that goes. When you need it, you can't find it. Okay, we've got some cool yarn. And there we have it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a round, and when I come to the last stitch, between the second and the last stitch, I'm going to stick my marker, and that's going to signify that that is the last needle. So the pattern for this particular mitten cuff is very, very simple. It is a knit purl rib, and we are going to do this rib pattern for 2.5 inches. Very basic. My working yarn is behind and my tail is in front. And I'm going to start with the knit stitch. And then I'm going to do a purl stitch. And I'm going to do a knit stitch. And I'm going to do a purl stitch. So the cuff of your mitten is simply knit 1, purl 1 in the round. And you're going to do that for 2.5 inches. So here we are, did the second to the last stitch. This is my last stitch on my third needle, and I just am going to put my marker there. Some people have fancy marking stitches. We just kind of use whatever yarn is hanging around, and my last stitch will be a purl. And that gets the first round of my cuff onto my needles. You're just going to keep continuing to do this pattern, knit 1, purl 1, until you have 2.5 inches. And now I'm up on round 2. And you're going to knit your knits. And you're going to purl your purls. And we will come back when we have our 2.5 inches, all total from the cast on edge to the top, 2.5 inches of our knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. And here we are, wool gang. This is going to be my last row, and I should hit the 2.5 inches that we need. I promise these videos are going to get better when I learn how to knit while looking through the camera lens. Things won't be so wonky once I get the knack of it. It's like anything else. There's a learning curve. And right now, I'm learning the curve. Usually, I knit with my knitting in my lap like everybody else, but for these little videos that we're doing, this is quite the thing to learn. We're almost done with the second needle. Now there are all kinds of tips and tricks if you're discovering that maybe this particular size that we're making does not fit you. Maybe you have a slightly smaller hand or a larger hand. By sizing your needles up and down, which I'm sure most of you knew because you know how to knit already, by sizing your needles up or down, you can get the gauge that you're going to need to fit your hand. People ask me all the time, they really don't like when you knit on camera in dark colors. The reason why I'm doing this particular mitten in dark colors is because it's going to be my barn mitten this winter. Every winter I try to change out my mittens. Here in the far north of Maine, up along the Canadian border, we can get to -30 in the winter time real quick. And because they're going to be barn mittens, I chose a darker color. And this should put me at my 2.5 inches that we need. Check it out. From cast to the top of the needle is 2.5 inches. Now, in the next video, we are going to start making the hand portion of our mitten, and we're going to change over to our size 6, our larger needles. Can't wait to see you guys on the next video. Remember, be the kindness that you want to see in the world, and as always, Carpe Diem, because no one promises us a tomorrow.